Welcome to this portion of the Migration Manager Suite demonstration. In this demo, we'll be taking a look at each phase and doing an example demonstration of the major features of a migration process. As you can see by this pictorial diagram, Migration Manager Suite is capable of inter-forest and intra-forest migrations and synchronization. Also, the bulk of what you're getting with this utility is that it doesn't just migrate and synchronize accounts and attributes as well as other AD objects, but it also repermissions on all of the below platforms listed in this pictorial diagram. And it's not even limited to these either. So with all of this in mind, it truly does create a mirror image of the same account in another forest or domain. So when all of this is grouped together into one unified platform, it actually features a very robust migration product and an all-encompassing migration solution. In the upcoming portion, we'll be demoing the source and target domain, which are already created, the properties of each section of the Migration Manager for AD console, and a good portion of the major features it can provide. Here we can see the Migration Manager for Active Directory console. As you can see, there's already a source and target domain pair created. You can do this just by right-clicking on directory migration and inserting admin credentials in the names of each domain. It's really as simple as that. Next, we'll go into the properties of a domain pair and what you can set on that level. There's some very important options in here that could be appealing to a customer. So in domain pair properties, we have various options. You can set your source and target domain information and credentials, and shown as the skip objects section, so you can actually skip any unnecessary objects like disabled accounts or expired accounts that may not even be needed in your migration or synchronization scope. There are also conflict resolution rules which will come into play, and you can control exactly how the product will handle a conflict and resolve it. There's also an object matching section which will govern how the product matches accounts and what attributes it's going to match on. For example, SAM account name J Stevens would match to J Stevens in the target, just as example. But you can also match on SID history and email address as well. It's important that all of these options are thoroughly considered in a planning phase for a migration and preparation, and also showcased to any potential customers that might want to utilize these features to make sure that their migration is truly a zero-impact experience. Next, rather than synchronization, we're going to have a look at the migration session feature. Now, a migration session differs from synchronization because it's more granular. You can select individual AD objects and choose how to sync them and match them, so it offers a lot more granular capability. It does require additional licenses to utilize this feature, as synchronization licenses are essentially free, but having migration sessions available is extremely valuable for that full experience. So we'll right-click and create a new session. And it has a wizard just like most other things in the migration suite. We'll give it a name and a description here. Next, this is where you select what actual object that you want to migrate. Now there's a couple options here. You could use the GUI picker just like we're doing now. You can select entire OUs, individual objects, groups, users, etc. So you can make it as granular as you wish. An alternative to the GUI object picker is actually using an import file. Now what this means is that you can select users or other objects in bulk via import file to import them to this migration session. One of the major benefits of an import file is the ability to do an account rename in the exact same migration session in one fell swoop. This is extremely valuable in environments that might have users with similar account names or something that you might be matching on in your domain pair properties. So this is why planning is extremely important. But this feature gives you that ability to actually govern those accounts that might have similar SAM account names, for example, and rename them to a non-conflicting SAM account name in the target. And other pieces of software like Enterprise Reporter or Change Auditor for LDAP queries can let you run queries to determine what users have the same attributes that you might be matching on in the source and target. That way you have your import file all ready to go and you can rename the accounts at will. So to do that, we just select import and then select our import file. As you can see, all the import file is a tab delimited text file, but also has the actual attributes that you want to match or change on in the top row of the tab delimited text file. Below that are the actual values, tab separated, of the objects that the import file is actually going to consist of. So here you can actually set manual matching by SAM account name of accounts that have entirely different names. So in scenarios where both domains could have a J. Smith SAM account name, but they're two entirely different people. So it's definitely worth showcasing to any prospective users or clients. So next we'll just close the import file and select it. We can see that on the next screen we can choose which target OU to actually match or create the objects in. And in the select target container screen we have various options. We can migrate OU hierarchy. You can migrate the objects with their OUs to the selected target OU, or migrate without the OUs and just place them in the selected OU. Additionally, you can merge with existing accounts on the target and merge and move the objects to the selected OU. You can merge and leave the account where it was before the migration, if it's already in the spot that you want it. And never merge and skip accounts that match anything on the target. In the Set Security Settings section, we actually have our SID history, UPN suffix, password handling, and security descriptor migration rules. Essentially, you can either skip, merge, or copy the NT security descriptor to the target account so that special permissions like send as come over and propagate when the account is migrated. Additionally, you can add SID history to the target account so target accounts have access to source resources that rely on SID history. This might be extremely beneficial. You can also add the source members to corresponding target groups. Probably work best in a two-way trust environment. However, this is not always necessary. UPN handling is often a popular feature because you can actually set the domain suffix of the UPNs to whatever you wish. This can help with organization as well as any dependencies on UPNs in the target. And lastly, we have the copy account password feature, not to be confused with password synchronization and domain synchronization, but this can be a one-time password copy. So if you wish to do it, you can just do it here. In the object processing section, we can actually enable or disable target and source accounts within that same session. This is useful if you just want to set an associated external account or an MS Exchange Master account SID to an account that's in another forest, so coming to and from a resource forest setup. This would probably be beneficial. For intra-forest, you can reconnect an Exchange mailbox to the account after you move it. Also, there's the custom add-in section, which allows you to do specific things with accounts. For example, you'd point to an XML file that allows you to copy Exchange-related attributes to a target environment, and you may not even have Migration Manager for Exchange at all. You can just pay a one-time nominal fee for a custom add-in that allows you to do specific things like this. So the capabilities are quite vast, and it allows a lot of customization for any specific organizational needs based on what they already have implemented. And let's not forget the attributes to skip section. This section is very important, and you can actually skip any attributes from syncing or migrating in this migration session in either direction, and you can even govern what object classes they're going to skip that attribute for. For example, user object class or INET org person or a computer object class. Next is the summary section of the migration wizard, and there's a valuable feature here called test mode, which will actually give you any insight to any conflicts or errors that might occur during that migration session if, hypothetically, you were to migrate these objects that you just selected. It's often a very good debugging tool and planning tool for primary or pilot users that you want to initially migrate. And when we're done here, we just click Next and choose to start migrating the objects. And next, the migration of the object selected begins. After the migration, there's actually a few things that occur here. This searches the target synchronization scope or migration scope selected for any objects that are matched by the matching attributes selected here or the domain pair. If there is one that does match, it matches to that object by stamping it with the service attribute and begins syncing over any attributes selected for migration or synchronization. This matching info is actually stored in the LDS database so that these accounts are always known to be matched to one another, provided that info is correct. There's also the links resolving section, and that refers to the DSA link resolver. This is just a service that is responsible for any linked attributes in AD and populates group membership, manager, managed by, or member of attributes, and it usually just executes during a migration session or during DSA synchronization. If target objects requiring link resolution are missing, they'll be placed in an unresolved links queue, which is visible on the statistics screen of synchronization in the AD console. It's recommended to migrate users first, then groups, or migrate users and groups in the same session so that these links attributes are actually populated correctly the first time. So after this, the migration session completes and you get a summary of any attempted objects versus migrated objects, etc. So say we accidentally migrated a user or object that we didn't want to. You can just right-click on that session, click Undo, and then the Undo wizard comes up and you can granularly select what objects migration that you want to undo, or select all of them if you wish. So it's actually really valuable if you accidentally pick a user in a group or something went wrong during the migration and you want to just undo it to make sure you have all your settings correct. It's perfectly doable. Now keep in mind that migration sessions can't be deleted because of the fact that you won't be able to undo that migration session if it's not available in the list. There's simply no other option to undo. So now that our account is actually migrated to the target Active Directory environment, we're going to have a look at updating the actual user's workstations. And we're just going to go over to a actual user workstation of a user that was migrated, and we'll see that Amy Lyle has specific permissions on this folder object. And what we're going to do is actually update the permissions so that the target user account has the same permissions on these objects or this particular share without Amy even knowing anything is going on with her workstation. So that's one of the main benefits of the Resource Update Manager. So to get there, you can just go to the Migration Manager for AD console and select Resource Update Manager in the main menu. Or there's actually a Start menu option to launch the console separately as well. So in the Resource Update Manager console, there's a couple things you got to do preemptively, like put in the admin credentials, but you can create a collection and actually organize your workstations and server objects to update by what stage of the migration they're in, department, or even by alphabetical order if you wanted to. And there's many ways to add objects to the collection, but here we're just going to use an object picker and select the workstation client 1 that we showed earlier with the folder permissions. Now, the processing of the workstation actually takes place over multiple stages. Discovery phase, which deploys an agent to the workstation. There is a possibility of performing an agentless processing as well later on. So if you don't wish to deploy agents to the workstations, then you can skip this part and go right to processing and make sure that you select the agentless checkbox within the wizard there. If you want to deploy the agent package via GPO, you can actually use the tools menu and create an agent setup package that you can deploy as well. So this might help if there's firewall complications between this console and the actual objects you want to process. Next, we can create a processing task. And the processing task is pretty much what updates the user's profiles and every ACL on that object so that the target user has the same permissions. And within that processing task wizard, you can actually govern what type of rights to process and what resources to process as well. Registry, file system, local profiles, IIS, anything at all. So there are very granular possibilities here if you wish it to be that way. The main objective with this particular workstation object is that we process it so Amy's profile is totally fine, and when she logs in the target domain, she doesn't notice anything out of place at all. So when we click next, we actually have an advanced options section of the wizard, and we can choose to perform the task remotely without even installing an agent on the actual workstation or server object, which may be desirable in some scenarios. In addition to this, there are script execution options before and after this particular task. This is valuable if there's something specific, perhaps a third-party dependency or something that needs to be in place for the target account or for the target workstation when it's ready to be used. Next is the scheduling and timeout section, where you can actually tell the product when to start this task or decide later to execute it manually. Additionally, if some of these objects are not accessible, like remote users or mobile users that only connect to the network periodically, you can actually set it to pen for a number of hours before it actually begins. All these options are valuable for workstation processing or server processing that you might want only to occur during non-business hours or something of that sort. After this, you can type in a simple task description to describe to anyone else that might be using this product what the task is for or when to run it, and we can go to the tasks view. And here we can see that the task is running and processing, and sometimes it takes a little bit of time, especially if you are using a agentless option like as shown in the last part of the wizard. Ultimately, you can view the processing details, and it will do an estimate of how many entries and objects it has to update before it's complete. It'll also summarize any errors as well. So it gives you a reasonable idea in terms of percentages and how many objects have been updated as to how complete the task actually is. So we'll actually let this task run and fast forward to completion. Now it looks like the processing details are all full and the processing task is now complete. Now at this point, the items on the actual workstation are all updated. The access control lists and account permissions are there for the target account. However, this workstation still technically resides in the source domain, and you can keep it this way for as long as you need. Just keep in mind you may have to reprocess if any changes to those access control lists or permissions occur before you actually do the domain move. So keep that in mind. So now we'll actually showcase the actual object and the target account being visible in the access control list showing updated permissions. So now accounts that had permissions on this object that have been involved with the migrations or migration sessions have their target accounts added with the exact same rights as well. Next, the object is actually ready for a domain move to the target domain. And here we can just select the actual domain and where we want to move it to. There are two valuable options here, and that's change the last logged in domain to the target domain, so the user will essentially notice nothing provided there are no errors, And you can preserve the computer account in the source domain just in case you want to move back to it for whatever reason. So these are all very valuable options to have. You can also select a target OU to put the computer object into. When we click Next, we're actually brought to the Grant Local Administrator Privileges section of the wizard, and all you do here is any admin accounts that you want to have local administrator rights on this box right away, straight after the move, without waiting for any AD propagation or anything. You can select the account here. Next, we have the computer restart prompt section, and this is so that the domain move can actually complete fully by doing a reboot of the machine. You can change the message to the user to be a little bit more friendly, and you can also delay the restart by a static amount of time. And continuing onward, we have the advanced options section again, and we can choose to use agents or not use agents. Also, you can run a script before and after task execution, and this might be really valuable if there's a specific policy in the target domain that's going to be required to be executed on the target machine as soon as it joins that domain. So this is going to be environment and organization specific, but could be very valuable if there's specific things that need to be set for target domains. And clicking Next brings us to the task schedule and timeout window. Explanation is pretty much the same as the processing task. You can choose to start this task now or at a set time, or you can run it manually later on and just create the task preemptively. Additionally, you can have it penned for a certain amount of time in case that machine or server object is not accessible at that time over the network. So we'll just enter a task description on the next screen, and then the task starts to execute. Now, because we didn't choose a restart prompt, it's going to restart automatically, so we'll head to that workstation now. And it is shutting down. As with any native tools like disjoining and joining a domain, a reboot is necessary to finalize that process. And here we have Amy's login, switch to the target domain. So entering a workstation and loading the profile, everything is exactly as she had left it. So essentially the end user is not going to notice a thing, they're not going to be inconvenienced, and they won't even skip a beat. All permissions, folder permissions, share permissions, and the profile are all intact and exactly as they would wish it. Next, you can actually use the cleanup task, and all this task is a post-migration activity after the user is fully migrated and their workstation moved over. And you can actually use this task to clean up any source user permissions once you verify everything is in place for the target user. Provided that account isn't needed anymore, then why should they be there, right? Additionally, it will clean up any agents deployed for any of these tasks throughout the resource updating process. Keep in mind the resource updating process is optional. You can do it right after migrating or syncing the Active Directory objects, or after the user's mailbox is synchronized and switched. So keep that in mind. This concludes the Migration Manager for AD segment of a demonstration. Next up is the Migration Manager for Exchange Suite demonstration. So next we're going to talk about the Migration Manager for Exchange solution and what it can provide. So at this point, our user is migrated and their workstation is processed and moved. However, there has to be some sort of coexistence capability between Exchange environments. So by doing that, we synchronize the account with the Migration Manager for AD solution and choose to mail enable the user in the target. Now, even though the source mailbox is still the live mailbox, we're able to do a lookup in either direction and see the same gal between the two exchange organizations. One of the many things that the Migration Manager for Exchange solution provides is the ability to pre-synchronize data to the target before those target resources are even used. So, for example, we can synchronize public folder data preemptively before it's even starting to be used in the target. We can then, once all that data is synchronized, trigger a two-way synchronization for that public folder data so that whenever there is a change to the source, it will sync to the target. And whenever there is a change to synchronized data that's within the migration scope in the target, it will sync back to the source. So there is full coexistence on a public folder level. With users, we have redirector addresses stamped on the target object to redirect mail sent to the target mailbox back to the source, to the actual live mailbox. And once the user's mail and calendar data is fully synchronized and the user is undergone a mailbox switch, that data is then redirected from the source through a redirection address to the target live mailbox at that point. So there really is a lot of value in this period of coexistence because essentially the target mailboxes, public folder data, and calendar will all be ready and exactly the same by the time the users and other people start using these same target resources. So next we're going to have a look at the Migration Manager for AD console briefly, just to highlight the synchronization portion of directory synchronization. Right now, directory synchronization is stopped, and here we can see the source user's mailbox and some contents within it, and also the global address list that is associated with the source exchange organization and environment. So right now we do a lookup for Amy in the target environment and there's currently nothing there. However, when we start synchronization with these users in the synchronization scope, choosing the mail enable or mailbox enable the target user when it's created or synced, the synchronization starts and goes through an initial synchronization phase. When complete, it'll go to a sleeping phase, and this is just the sleep interval when there's nothing left to sync for this interval. Now that the directory synchronization is complete, redirection is in place, and gals are synchronized, we can go to the Exchange Data tab of the Migration Manager console. As you can see in the main window of the Exchange Data or Migration Manager for Exchange console, there are steps laid out in various order. You can go through each of these steps top to bottom to perform all the necessary prerequisite tasks. We have a public folder synchronization job pre-configured, and if we go to the properties of the public folder synchronization job, we can see the source public folder hierarchy and where we're actually putting it in the target public folder hierarchy. Through these arrows, we can actually govern whether it is a one-way or a two-way synchronization. Again, two-way synchronization behaves source to target first, and then anything in the migration scope that's changed in the target will be synced back to the source subsequently. Now, since some changes were made, we're going to commit changes to this collection or public folder synchronization job. You can select the Agent Manager tab for this particular job and govern all agents associated with it, as well as the agent hosts. So there is a public folder source and target agent on each server. After this, we can expand a calendar synchronization job. This job is also pre-created. And within a calendar synchronization job, we have a demo calendar collection created. And to govern what it does, we can right-click on the collection and go to Properties. And from the General tab of the collection properties, we can enable the collection right away. We can also choose what agent to use for calendar synchronization, in this case the calendar synchronization agent. It's a single agent which connects to both source and target, and then synchronizes appointments over the network. You can also check to enable two-way synchronization, which is only recommended for resource and shared mailboxes. In the Select Mailbox Database tab, we can actually choose to move them to a desired target mailbox database if we want to, or choose to leave them in their current mailbox database. Under the Workflow tab, it's just Time Governance. And under Collection Items, we actually have the users and calendars mailboxes that we're actually syncing in this collection. You can add users by group, individually, by container as well. Under Filters, you can actually select skipping certain types of message by object class, as well as skipping older items that the end users may not even care about anymore. So it's actually pretty versatile. Next, we're going to select the calendar synchronization host, since there's only one agent for calendar synchronization, and start it. In this case, it's a unified calendar synchronization agent, which is governed by the migration agent for Exchange architecture. And the target is Exchange 2013 in this scenario, so the new agent architecture is used. And heading over to the Statistics tab of the collection, we can see all users involved with this collection and their current status. And as we refresh it, eventually the statistics will update as in sync or syncing. The Statistics tab is one of the most accurate ways that you can get a real-time or close to real-time update in the synchronization process. And after a few minutes, all the users in this collection's calendar are in sync. So now we'll take a look at a target mailbox for a user and confirm that some of these appointments have actually come over. And we can see that some of these users have appointments booked in various time slots. Next, we usually go into Mailbox Synchronization. So we have a pre-created collection with these users, and we will enable it. Here we can see the list of members in this collection. And by going to the collection properties, you can govern all the same things that you were shown in the calendar synchronization section. You can add users by all the same means, or even by adding by container. There's a Advanced tab where you can add by LDAP filter as well. Different here, though, is the Mailbox Switching section, and you can actually choose to right-click on these mailboxes in the list in the graphical user interface to switch the mailboxes. And what a switch means is to change the redirection from the source to the target, rather than target back to the source. This is for when these mailboxes are fully synced and the user's ready to start using the target mailbox as their live mailbox. You can also set an automatic switch criteria as well. There are also the same filtering capabilities for message classes. So we'll start synchronization for this mailbox next. And in the statistics window, you can get a good overview of this mailbox collection and see the sync status of all these users. It looks like all these users' mailboxes are almost ready to switch. You can get a good overview of discovered items, failed items, skipped items, which could be corrupt ones, etc. So it gives you a good idea of the scope of items and work that this particular collection has to do. And after some time passes, we'll do a refresh and we see Amy is ready to switch. So we'll right click or click the switch option for Amy and do a manual mailbox switch. Next, the mailbox switched successfully, so redirection is now redirecting to the target mailbox, and they get a switch message in their mailbox stating that the mailbox has been migrated. Now any items sent to the source mailbox will be redirected to the target. So now that Amy has been fully migrated, both with Migration Manager for AD and all of her mailbox and calendar data migrated to the target with Migration Manager for Exchange, and her mailbox switch with redirection in place, we can actually update the user's Outlook profile with the Client Profile Updating utility. This is a lightweight utility which can run on the user's desktop remotely to update their Outlook profile to point to the new exchange and update any rules or settings that they have with their client, so that essentially nothing is noticed that is out of sorts. So now we'll head to Amy's workstation and run the utility manually, but it can be run remotely and via GPO or other means, most definitely. And as you can see, the target mailbox is essentially a mirror image of what the source mailbox looked like. And if you go into account settings and the exchange options, you can actually see that it's pointed to the target exchange server. And by now, public folder synchronization has completed somewhat, so any test public folders that are migrated over are also visible to that user. So in the end, with this demo of both sides of the product, along with the Client Profile Updating utility and Resource Update Manager, we have a user that was isolated in the source with a source mailbox and some content within it. They were then migrated via migration session and created in the target domain. After this, their workstation was processed and moved to the target. However, you can wait for this phase until after Mailbox Switch has already occurred as well. Then Amy was directory synchronized to the target and mail enabled. GAL coexistence was present, and then we migrated source exchange public folders to the target exchange. Then we migrated Amy's calendar data and migrated her mailbox data until it was fully synced. At that point, Amy's mailbox was then switched, so redirection was now from the source to the target exchange, and then we were able to update her Outlook profile to point to her live target exchange mailbox. So in the end, the only thing that Amy noticed was that she logged into a new domain. Everything, including the user's profile, permissions, and everything of note for the user and what they require is all in place in the target. This concludes the Migration Manager for Exchange portion of the demo.